today's expert webinar. My name is Div Bensali. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at AccountantsWorld. Today we're proud to present Rise of the Cloud Ecosystem, a presentation from Jim Boomer, CIO and shareholder of Boomer Consulting Incorporated. Before we get started with Jim, brief introduction about myself. I'm Div Bensali, as I mentioned, Vice President of Marketing for AccountantsWorld. I want to thank you again for joining us today. A reminder that the webinar audio can be broadcast over your computer speakers or via telephone. And you can use the GoToWebinar audio panel to select your preference. I'll show you exactly where that is in just a moment here in case you haven't found it. If you'd like to get your copy of today's webinar materials, please go to www.accountantsworld.com, and just below the main panel you'll see a yellow goldish stripe that says Live Webinar, Download Class Materials. You can click on that to go ahead and download the materials and follow along with us. I wanted to remind you that CPE is available for today's webinar. We do offer one CPE. It's based on active participation during the live presentation. Active presentation is demonstrated by responding to all poll questions in the webinar, completing the survey at the end of the webinar. The survey will launch right after the webinar window is closed, and then we will send a link to the survey by email afterwards in case you don't see it at that point. CPE certificates will be emailed to you within 48 hours after eligibility has been determined. A couple of tips on using GoToWebinar. You'll notice up at the top we have the attendee control panel. You can use the orange arrow to expand or hide the panel while the presentation is going on. The audio options are right below that. And you can expand the audio section to choose whether you'd like to have telephone or computer speakers. If you select telephone, it will provide you with a dial-in number and the access code and PIN as well. And if you select the mic and speakers, it will automatically start playing through your computer speakers. If you have any questions, you can open up the questions section, expand that, type your question, and click send. We have a couple of people on this side who will be able to answer your questions along the way. And then finally, the slide deck handouts. If you haven't already downloaded them, please visit www.accountantsworld.com. Scroll down a little bit. You'll see a yellowish goldish stripe that will say download today's webinar materials. You can click on that and follow along with us. We are in webinar 4 of this year's expert webinar series. Or actually webinar 3. The upcoming one is actually myself in 3 weeks presenting 6 marketing strategies you can implement in the next 60 days. And then we will have presentations from August onward by Eric Asgerson, Rick Solomon, Gary Boomer, Jeff Gramlich, Lynn Nichols, Rick Telberg, and finally Wayne Kerr. He's the most recent addition on December 17th. So I encourage you to please sign up for as many of these as possible. As soon as the webinar is over, you'll see the Expert Webinar Series link on the AccountantsWorld homepage, and you can use that to sign up for any future webinars. You'll also be receiving a thank you email for attending afterwards, and that will contain a link to the upcoming webinar as well. Just a brief word about our sponsor, AccountantsWorld. AccountantsWorld is the recognized pioneer in cloud computing solutions for accountants for over a decade. We've been providing integrated cloud-based solutions that put accountants first since 2001. And our primary goal is to provide accountants with better control over their core services, including accounting, payroll, and document management, the ability to work more collaboratively with clients, and higher profits in fewer hours. If you'd like to learn more about our suite of 8 integrated solutions, please visit accountantsworld.com for more information. We'll also have our phone number at the end of the webinar, as well as a special offer. So before I turn it over to Jim, I'd like to just provide a brief bio of Jim Boomer. He is a shareholder and CIO of Boomer Consulting Incorporated, director of the Boomer Technology Circles and the Producer Circle. Jim has been the chair of the AICPA's Tech Plus Conference and a past member of the CITP Credentials Committees. Jim has been named one of the top 25 thought leaders and one of the 40 under 40 in public accounting technology by CPA Practice Advisor, and was recently recognized as one of the top 100 influential people in the accounting profession by Accounting Today. So at this point, it's my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Jim Boomer.
All right. Thank you very much, Div, for that kind introduction. I'm going to get my screen sharing here, and that should be showing my slides now. So I just want to start by thanking everyone that is joining us for today's webinar. And as Div said, the topic is the rise of the cloud ecosystem. And I'm Jim Boomer, as Div said. I'm CIO and shareholder for Boomer Consulting. And you saw my snapshot bio, but before I get started, I'll just take a few moments to tell you a little bit more about myself and Boomer Consulting as well. So I've been with Boomer for about 8 years. I guess this stint, 8 years. I did grow up around the business, which my father started, so I had a few stints with the company prior to starting my real career. My primary focus, as Div said, are as the director of Boomer Technology Circles, the Producer Circle, and our CIO Advantage. These are all communities of leading firms from across the country. And I'll tell you about one of these a little later in the webinar, which is the Producer Circle, because it relates to this topic. But prior to Boomer, I spent some time with Arthur Andersen and Bearing Point in both Phoenix and San Francisco, starting out in the audit group and then transferring into business consulting. I did decide to give college another go and spent a couple years getting my MBA at the University of Texas at Austin, and then joined the Boomer team on a full-time basis. I live in Prairie Village, Kansas, which is basically Kansas City, and I am married with a son, a daughter, and one black lab. So that's enough about me. I'll now kind of give you a brief overview of our organization for those of you that aren't familiar with Boomer Consulting. Our focus is solely on CPA firms across the country. We work with what most would label the largest firms, ranging from $3 million in revenue on up to $500 million in revenue. We grew out of a CPA firm and started in the technology realm. We're still known for technology, but as you know, you can't talk about technology without impacting all areas of the firm. So as you can see, we've grown over the years to focus on our 4 primary areas, which we continue to have a technology focus where we help firms set their strategy and also provide peer communities. We also help firms in the area of growth and how they can leverage technology and process to grow their firms through both one-on-one consulting and also our peer-based communities. Talent's a huge issue, and we work with firms on developing really the middle of their firm, so their managers up to their newly appointed partners through our P3 Leadership Academy and our team building consulting. Leadership's the 4th focus area where we focus on both strategic planning and firm summits, and also provide a peer community for managing partners. Compensation, you'll see at the bottom, it has a big impact on the management of firms, but management of business in general as well. And so we often work with our clients to develop a compensation model that supports their strategic vision. So that's kind of what we focus on. I'm blessed to work with an amazing team, an amazing organization, and among our shareholder group, we're fortunate to have received several recognitions in our profession. We've also published a number of guides on timely topics, as well as a handful of books. The latest book, which is right in the middle there, is by my partner, Sandra Wiley, and is an excellent read on the topic of collaboration. So her book, The Journey Ahead, if you're interested in learning a little more about collaboration both internally and with your clients or customers, the Journey Ahead is a great read. And we've also used it as a tool internally with our organization. So that's the enough of an intro about myself and Boomer Consulting. And before I kind of get into the meat of today's topic of the cloud ecosystem, I want to provide a brief overview of sort of the driving forces behind it in our profession, especially with the clients that we work with being CPA firms. Now, I know there's a handful of you that are on here that are in industry, and I think this is relevant to you too, because as CPAs start to really move up the value chain in terms of the services that they provide, it's good to know what's coming down the pipe. So really there's two high-level trends that are converging to create opportunities here. The first is cloud technologies. You've probably heard a presentation or two about the cloud over the last several years, but it's gaining more momentum. And a lot of that momentum in CPA firms is driven by a renewed interest in client accounting services. What once was thought of as simply transactional in nature and really a low-profit service in a lot of firms, this wasn't really viewed as a strategic service line by most firms, and that's changing. And the cloud is driving a lot of that change. And the ability to have access to real-time data in a collaborative environment is really creating new opportunities for firms to provide improved client services, which are more advisory than the traditional compliance services that we are used to. So there's really three big pieces if you look from a macro level in the adoption of this trend and of the cloud and change in the firm. So the first is technology and the cloud, but this really is not the determinant of success by itself. A lot of firms are starting they're starting at that point with technology and selecting a platform before they really have their business model determined. Second is talent. So firms that have already headed down this path have recognized that some of the people they've used in the past for client accounting or bookkeeping don't necessarily have the skills that they need to thrive in advisory services or more consultative services. So there needs to be a focus on building the team that's the right fit as well. Third, and probably the most important and most challenging one, is business change. You know, as you can see up on the slide, this is the most significant challenge. And why is it so challenging? Well, the traditional model for providing compliance-based services will really have to change to be successful in this new model. And so this covers service lines that are offered, how you price those, marketing of those services, and a number of areas of just how you manage your business in general. So I've mentioned value-added services, advisory services already, but let me give you a few visuals to explain really what I'm talking about here. The first depicts moving up the ladder to higher value services. So traditionally, a lot of client accounting services were labeled as bookkeeping, and it was a lot about transactional services and those compliance-based. And so you had things like bill payment, financial reporting, reconciliations, a lot of time spent on QuickBooks or other desktop accounting support and sending files back and forth, basically fixing mistakes that were made by clients trying to do it themselves. And then you've got tax really in that transactional or compliance side. And we've thrown around this tagline of trusted business advisor for many years. But I question whether we're really living up to that. And I know the trust is there, and the AICPA has done a number of services to support that. But I think there's a whole lot more opportunity here for both CPA firms and businesses to work more tightly together in a partnership. And so as you get into more advisory services, this is where you get into strategic planning, helping your clients with succession planning, acting as a CFO, an outsourced CFO, estate planning. You can see the list, but what's really driving this and what has been sort of the spark that has gotten this trend really moving is the availability of cloud accounting solutions. And as I said before, more collaborative, more real-time data that's available to both CPA firm and client as well. So a second way that I'd like to share with you, just to give you a visual of what I'm talking about, is a model that we've been refining over the years to really explain level one, what we call level 1, 2, and 3 services. And here's the latest that is, and it's really resonating with a lot of CPA firms that see it. And it probably resonates with a lot of you in industry as well in terms of the services that you could use or desire. So it's, as I said previously, just a moment ago, for some time now, CPAs have been labeled as that most trusted business advisor to their small to mid-sized business clients. But that question again is, have we really been living up to that title? Most of the core services that CPA firms are providing fall into the compliance or transactional category, which really I'd submit make them more of a trusted technical advisor than a trusted business advisor. So to truly live up to this tagline, I think firms and CPAs alike need to better understand their client's business and offer services that focus on business performance and strategy. And if you look at what the Big Four are doing these days, that is where their growth is coming from, is from more consultative services that focus on their client's business performance and strategy. So the question we often ask is, and you can see it up on screen, but is your firm prepared to play above the line? So what are below the line services? These are those core services I referred to previously, and these are what we call level 1 services. So those are tax, assurance, and accounting services. These services are really compliance focused and have firms operating what we call below the line. So they've historically been the meal ticket for most CPA firms, and most of these offerings are really based on hindsight or looking in the rearview mirror at past data. And they really do require a high level of perfection. These are also the services that are threatened to become commoditized over time as advances in technology and the cloud continue to automate the exchange of data between systems and within your workflow. So you've also had the above-the-line services. So in order for our profession to avoid this commoditization and ultimately obsolescence, firms are going to have to change their services, packaging, pricing, processes, and systems and start operating above the line. By this, I mean they'll have to transform their offerings to include level 2 and level 3 services. I'll briefly outline what I mean by each of these categories. Level 2 are those advisory services focused on business performance, and they're based on insight of what's going on now, and they really are all about progress rather than perfection. So examples would be business advisory, wealth advisory, family office, those sorts of services. Then you get up into the level 3, which are focused on strategic performance. They also require progress rather than perfection, but are based on foresight or looking into the future and the vision of what's going to happen in the future, or what you would like to make happen. So strategic planning, succession planning, mergers and acquisitions are just a few examples of those type of services. So I've already mentioned the advances in technology and in terms of the primary drivers, but um, I've mentioned technology already, but the cloud being probably the primary catalyst in that. But we now have capabilities, as I said, to be collaborative and access to real-time data that we didn't have in the past. But really beyond technology, there are other competitive threats coming from outside of our profession. Most of our small to mid-sized business clients have a number of trusted business advisors, each with their own primary focus. So you have CPA firms, you have financial advisors, legal firms, wealth advisors, just to name a few. And each of these really want to be that go-to advisor for their clients. And most businesses also want a single person from which to seek advice on many of their business needs. So CPA firms are positioned perfectly to take on this role and act as the quarterback in the relationship if they're ready to play above the line. Now, bundling, I'll move into next, and you can see this is one of our earlier revisions of that level 1, level 2, level 3 services. But as you get into this, changes in pricing model and grouping these services together have been very successful strategies for many of the firms that have already gone down this path, as well as providing options. The hours times dollars model simply doesn't work anymore in a consultative relationship, and the need for fixed or value pricing has become evident. This is a struggle for many firms and requires that you look at things more from the entrepreneur or the business owner perspective of, what would it cost a business to have the capabilities that a firm can provide and the platform that you provide in-house or on-premise. And usually it's a lot higher than dollars times or hours times rates. Clients are also like options, so this is where the bundling comes in. And a lot of firms we're seeing are providing sort of 3 options, the small, medium, and large. So if you think about the McDonald's supersize model, this is what's being applied there. So by having a small, medium, and large choice, clients tend to gravitate toward the middle, which oftentimes increases both the value for the client, but also the fees that are coming into the firm. And although there are many firms that we work with that have shared their surprise that when they tried this model, that a lot of clients are choosing the large, supporting the idea that many of their business clients are clamoring for a more advisory relationship with their CPAs. So to take it from French fries and put it into a little more, tangible example of what this might look like in a firm, here's an example. This certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all model, so you'll have to fill in your service lines and determine pricing that's appropriate. But as you can see, you start with sort of a baseline service offering and then build in more services that focus on business performance and strategy, thus increasing both the value and the price to the client. So where are we in terms of taking this whole trend from theory to actual execution? Well, let's look at it from the technology adoption life cycle, which was really made famous by Jeffrey Moore in his best-selling book, Crossing the Chasm. In this model, you have your early market made up of the innovators and early adopters who have a high willingness to try new things. And this is where you start to gain momentum, and once the momentum hits a certain level, you're able to cross what Moore calls the chasm and get to more mainstream adoption. And once you've made this leap, Moore refers to it as being in the tornado, as you get more and more people jumping on the bandwagon and the masses and the early majority start to adopt. You eventually hit a peak point, and then your adoption rates decline as the late majority and laggards join in, and that's referred to as Main Street. So in terms of client advisory services and the adoption of cloud accounting technology to drive this, I believe that the interest level in CPA firms has already crossed the chasm and is in the tornado, because we're talking to firms across the country that say this is a strategic objective, this has made it on their strategic plan. However, you know, execution, I believe, is lagging and is still in the early market stage. And I believe that this is going to change, and change rapidly over the next year or two, as firms recognize that technology is going to automate a lot of things that were involved in their traditional bread and butter services, and force a change in how they work with their clients. So what's causing execution to lag behind interest in our profession? Well, there are several challenges that firms face in moving above the line. First is finding the right champion, and it's not just a warm body that's willing to take it on, but someone with the access to resources and the political clout within the firm to drive this forward. Second is a shift in mindset, and this has two components in it. The battle between independence required for assurance services is really butting heads with the fact that independence is oftentimes jeopardized when you start to provide level 2 and 3 services. Many firms are seeing it as more profitable to provide those services and forego the audit. Oftentimes, they'll do the work up to the point that independence is required and then hand it off to another firm. The proposed changes in the SARS standards, which the AICPA has been talking a lot about lately, will also have an impact here. There's also the second lens to look at this from is there's also that past perception of client accounting that I mentioned earlier, that, you know, bookkeeping in firms has been treated almost as a second-class citizen, and a lot of the control and power has been shifted to the clients or the small to mid-sized businesses. The third challenge is building the team, and as I said before, what got you to the point where you are today might not be the same team that will take you forward into this new model. And resource allocation is also a challenge, with a lot of people trying to make building this service line a part-time job, while they also have their full-time job of doing tax or audit or whatever their specialty is within the firm. Change management's huge for any new endeavor, and it's especially so when you're required to change your business model, but also your technology, your pricing, your team, and your processes. And so there's a lot here that's making this very, very difficult in terms of the change management process. And then finally, in terms of technology, the cloud in and of itself is a disruptive technology and causing firms and businesses alike to rethink a lot of things. And this leads us nicely into the topic of cloud ecosystem. But before we go there, let's pause for our first polling question.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Let me go ahead and launch the first poll here. And all the attendees should now see the first poll question, which is your firm pursuing cloud accounting and client advisory services? And there are 4 options there. All you need to do is select the radio button for your answer. You don't have to click submit or anything there. Simply go ahead and put that in. And we've seen about 80% of people vote already. I'll give this another few seconds to get up over 90% before we close this. Okay, in just a few last seconds here. I'm going to close this in 5 seconds. Okay. And Jim, we can see the results here. 36% of people said they're still deciding, and then a fairly even number said either yes, we are in execution or planning stage, or no, we're not doing it at this point.
Okay, thank you, Div. I certainly think those results are in line with what I would expect to see. You know, over 75% of the audience here is at some stage in terms of analyzing this and making a decision. So we've got the largest group still deciding on whether this is part of their go-forward strategy. But we have a huge chunk of firms that are saying yes and are at some point in the path to adoption. So thank you for your responses. Very much in line with what we're seeing in the market as well. So let's start the cloud ecosystem discussion with a look at some of the leading concerns I hear on a regular basis concerning adoption of the cloud just in general. And this certainly isn't an exhaustive list, but it hits most of the commonly cited worries that I hear. The first being data security and privacy. Unfortunately, we live in a digital world full of bad guys trying to get at our data, and they seem to be one step ahead of the good guys that are trying to keep them out, which are oftentimes our IT professionals. And the reality is this is true in both a cloud and on-premise environment. The breach at Target recently highlights how you can be at risk even with your systems housed in your own four walls. I certainly don't want to minimize this concern because it's real and it's one we need to be prepared for, but we need to be prepared both from a prevention perspective and a response perspective. So understanding the requirements that if you do have a breach, what do you need to do? Number two is availability of service and downtime.
Jim, hi. I'm sorry. This
Yes.
is Sharon. I did have a question. Someone was asking you to explain how cloud computing is considered a disruptive technology from the previous slide before our polls launched.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. I think the cloud model in terms of how solutions are architected and how data is flowing in a cloud model are having a major impact. And I think you'll see this when I start to dive into and explain what a cloud ecosystem is, because it's sort of turning upside down on its head this thought process that we have to have all of our solutions provided by one vendor in-house, and there's more options to sort of plug in disparate pieces from third-party providers. So I know in the area of cloud accounting and client advisory services, this is already disrupting some of the more traditional software vendors that have been operating and continue to support a large client-server infrastructure or model for their software. So I hope that answered your question. If not, you can certainly submit another one, and I'll try to zero in on and elaborate on exactly what you're looking for. But thank you for the question. So I was going into number two, which is availability of service, and downtime's another major concern for businesses that are looking at cloud, both from the fact that you're dependent on internet connection and the dependence on a cloud provider to be up. So bandwidth, both speed and the availability, especially in rural locations, is a huge concern and a real concern. However, I think the things that we're seeing right here in the Kansas City area with Google Fiber are changing the landscape for connectivity across our country. Google's really forced the hand of all the providers and made them increase their speeds, lower their prices, and I think it's going to be using the disruptive technology phrase again, a real disruptor in our market. The second angle here from availability is downtime. You know, when a cloud provider goes down, it makes the headlines. When your firm or your business, for most of you does, it doesn't make the headlines because it's impacting a lot more people all in one fell swoop. But if you, and that makes it feel like, when we're reading about it all the time, that cloud providers have frequent outages. But if you honestly compare how much downtime you have in a cloud environment versus on-premise, the cloud providers would win out more often than not. Third is management of data, and I believe there is a question in here of, if I need to get my data, how easy is it for us to get into it? And this is the concern that really touches on that. So hopefully this will answer your question, but understanding who owns the data, how you can gain access to it, and the process or price for doing so is critical in the due diligence process when you're analyzing a cloud provider. So most of the reputable cloud providers have data clauses in their agreements about your data and who owns it, and ultimately it's your data, so there should be a process for you to be able to retrieve that data, and there may be a price tag on it, but you need to know what that is up front. So that is should be a big part of your due diligence. Liability is another concern. E-discovery is, even when we were on premise, this was a huge concern, and is one that businesses are struggling with, continuing to struggle with today. But in the cloud model, the laws are still being molded in this area, so it's an area that we certainly need to stay in tune with. Fifth would be flexibility, and when you move to the cloud, you may lose some of the flexibility that you would have if you had the systems in-house with like configurations, custom code, that kind of thing. But too often, we get caught up on minor functionality that we could learn to do without. So if an existing solution meets 95% of your needs, doesn't the cost and time savings and decreased frustration outweigh the 5% of features you'd be giving up? Now, sometimes the answer is no, it won't. But again, I don't think that's the norm. And then number 6, which I have highlighted here, is integration. And the impacts on integration is what I'm going to dive into a little more now as we talk about the cloud ecosystem. So I'll start this with a slide that highlights John Petto, who's a principal at Deloitte Consulting, and he has a whole piece on the Deloitte debates that touches upon the integration concern. So, the point of integration could be problematic, his counterpoint being that these concerns aren't unique to the cloud. My data could be compromised. He contends, and I would contend, that cloud models are more secure than you think. And getting more technology focused, once let's limit my ability to extend service layers. Not at all, you can add additional layers. And you can bring in additional applications and you'll see this in just a moment. But his final statements are there certainly may be sound reasons not to deploy a cloud solution, but integration and security shouldn't be the driving force behind this. So I see a question here around the privacy and data security, and so we've got a question on, wouldn't using cloud technology make a wider range of personal information susceptible to hackers? Think this might increase the chances of identity theft. What would you recommend to reassure clients against this? Well, I would say that we're seeing more and more, and again, as cited with the Target breach, and there were several other retailers that have recently announced their breaches, and a lot of them had in-house systems. And the reality is that there is going to be attacks on businesses that have sensitive client data, whether that's in the cloud or not. Now you think about how the resources and the dollars that have been invested in securing the environment, and I think one of my favorite lines from one of the cloud providers when I posed this question because I've been hearing it a whole lot, was my data centers are protected with guys with machine guns. Most CPA firms' data centers or business data centers are protected at most by an employee badge that allows you to get in. Now, that's not true for everybody, but for the most part, I think, again, like the availability, if you're honest with yourself in terms of who has a better security, a better handle on security, it's likely going to be these businesses that that is their core competency, their core business that is putting food on the table for them. So we certainly hear more about it when it happens in a cloud model, but there are breaches happening across the country for people that are not in the cloud as well. So I hope that answered your question sufficiently. So moving on in the integration area, over the last 5 years, one of the most common arguments I hear about moving to the cloud does involve data integration. And I'm often asked, why would I give up my tightly integrated suite of on-premise software to move to a cloud solution or even a disparate group of cloud solutions? And the answer is the cloud ecosystems that are developing before our eyes. In the cloud model, integration and data flow becomes much easier through web services. Now, that has a qualifier on it. The providers have to take an open approach and an open stance and work in a partnering relationship with other third parties, and that's what this topic of cloud ecosystem is all about. And most of the cloud providers are using the latest technologies, which have often been labeled with the tagline of Web 2.0 technologies to build their platforms, which oftentimes provides for better search, for reporting and collaboration capabilities, and ultimately better integration here. So what does a cloud ecosystem look like? What is it? Well, when a software as a service vendor becomes a major player in the market or the leading solution for a given problem, they start to attract an ecosystem. So oftentimes these market leaders are where they are because they've focused on solving a single or a small number of problems and do it very well. In other words, they aren't trying to be all things to all people. This naturally leads to some feature gaps, which are then filled by third-party cloud applications that integrate with that SaaS solution. As they draw in these third-party apps, the ecosystem grows and it increases the capabilities and value of the solution, thus attracting more apps to the ecosystem. And this option, or this continues to, the options just continue to grow as the ecosystem builds stronger. And it not only creates incremental value for the SaaS solution that's in the middle of all of this, but it also creates additional entry points and lowers the barrier to start using that solution. Since the user might have started out with one of the sort of peripheral apps and then is looking for a solution that integrates with it, it also lowers the barrier of entry. So an example of this is the ecosystems that we're seeing rapidly develop around many of the leading cloud accounting solutions, such as AccountantsWorld, Intact, Intuit, and Xero. And while these SaaS vendors focus on their core competencies of accounting and integrated payroll solutions, they're also working with third-party cloud service providers that are filling gaps like reporting tools, dashboards, work papers, project management, CRM, just to name a few. And combined, the ecosystem covers the majority of the software needs. And any holes that remain will likely be filled by a partner joining the ecosystem in the near future. So this ecosystem, really, if you look at it, is a set of partners, which are often referred to as add-ons, that work directly with the SaaS vendor to fill functionality gaps. And in the end, increase the value of both. So in layman's terms, it's about the sum of the parts exceeding the value of each of these solutions on its own. So when all the gaps in the ecosystem are filled, users are now able to have sort of the best of both worlds, an integrated suite made up of best-of-breed solutions. And this really creates freedom, as you now have options for a variety of functions within your firm or business. And many times the switching costs are lowered if you need or want to make a change with one of the components. And a lot of the solution providers are trying to lower these switching costs even more by creating conversion tools and helping you to convert your data if you want to make a switch. So let's take a pause here for a moment and look at our second polling question. And while we do that, I'll also take a moment and look through the questions here and see if we've got any others that I can address after we do our question.
Okay, great. I will go ahead and open the second question here. And you should see the second question launching in just a second here. The question is, has your firm adopted the cloud? Yes, with all applications. Yes, just for some applications. No, and not planning to. No, but currently considering. So please go ahead and select one of those four options. And I was mistaken before I said there was no submit button because I don't see one, but you do. So please click submit right after you select an option. And remember, the poll questions are required in order to receive CP at the end of the webinar. So we'll wait for just another few seconds here. Okay, and I'll go ahead and close it there. And Jim, it looks like 43% of respondents are not currently, have not yet adopted the cloud, but are considering it. Another 38% are using it just for some applications. Interesting answers.
Yeah, certainly interesting. And again, much like the first question, not totally surprising. You know, it's hard for a lot of firms to be completely in the cloud. There are some, but at least within CPA firm space, there are some limits in terms of some of the applications having cloud options or feasible cloud options. So again, it's not surprising to me that we have only a smaller group at 14% saying that they have no plans to consider the cloud, and the majority are either considering or have started to move some applications. But again, a very small number have been able to get everything out of their internal infrastructure. So before I dive back in here, I'll address a couple questions here. So one, coming in, the big problem with cloud computing back in the day was proprietary software locking businesses to specific solutions. What part of cloud may now be based on open source, if any? Well, I would say just the business model and the attitude of taking on a more open model. And that question leads perfectly into what I'm going to talk about next. You know, in the on-premise solution environment, there was much more of a focus on making software proprietary, making the switching costs very high and very, very difficult, or as difficult as possible. And I think that is becoming less so as we see these cloud solutions build out these ecosystems where they play nicely with other solutions that aren't provided by them. They also, just based on the market demands, are having to have processes and ways for data to be able to be exported if you decide to make a change. So open source is a little bit different topic, and there are some solutions that are open source, but an open architecture, I would say, is becoming much more the norm with with the true cloud providers. So let's get into that a little more. So open versus closed architecture was the next thing. As I said, that was what I had next on the list, and that question led right into it. So, this is really a new chapter in a long-standing battle between the open and closed architectures. The infamous battle that we saw between Apple and Microsoft over the operating system and office productivity software is a perfect example of this. Most would say Microsoft ultimately won out in that first battle with an open approach, and history would support this most of the time. I believe the open model will prevail over the closed. And the underlying force behind this is the consumers prefer having a choice. So I believe the open architecture is critical to the success of providers in the rapidly evolving cloud world. Those cloud providers that accept that they can't be all things to all people will adopt that open collaborative approach and will win, and those that hold on to sort of that closed proprietary model will likely get left behind trying to hold on to market share of their legacy software. I'm going to take one other question that came in about what happens, because going back to the concerns, this is another one. It wasn't on the list, but it ties to viability of the cloud provider. But what happens if your company's data, if your cloud hosting company goes under? And much like the question about how to get your data back, I would say that you need to have those discussions up front as part of the due diligence. And so there's two aspects to this. One, what is the process for me to get my data back, whether it's my own choice to leave or I'm being forced to leave because that provider is going out of business. You need to have answers to those questions and know how you can get at your data. Second is also part of the due diligence is you need to dig as deep as you can into the sustainability and viability of the solution, and be careful with solutions that have just popped on the scene and haven't been around for long, that are haven't started to haven't proven out their business model and how to have a sound business model. So I know it's not a real go down the checklist list, but or answer, but you really need to have those discussions up front. So is this a new phenomenon? Well, with the recent growth and popularity of this ecosystem buzzword in the context of the cloud, one would think that it's new, but in reality, companies have been building ecosystems for a number of years. So you look at like Microsoft, IBM, HP, they all encouraged independent software vendors to build their solutions on top of their enabling software. The major difference with cloud ecosystem is that these independent partners are a critical component of the business model now. Another recent example is with mobile operating systems. So you look at Apple, Google, yes, even BlackBerry, and Microsoft have been trying to lure the mobile app developers to build their apps on top of their platform in an effort to become the most valuable mobile ecosystem. And as with cloud ecosystems, mobile operating systems depend on their developers as part of the business model. So let's just quickly look at a few examples of this. So Bill.com is one that we see a lot of firms adopting both internally and with their clients. And if you look, they're in the center here, and if you think about the ecosystem that they've built out, from an expense reporting capability, they give options of Tally and Expensify, both integrate with Bill.com. Now the thing I'll say with integrations is not all are built the same, so you have to really dive into how those integrations work and how deep they are. Then when you get into the cloud accounting space, you can see there's a wide variety of options that play nicely with Bill.com, including AccountantsWorld, who has recently worked with Bill.com on an integration. And then you expand into CRM, and they've got integrations with Salesforce, Earth Class Mail from an email perspective, and then from tax, a tax 1099. And this is just a list of their certified integration partners. There's others that have come from the other angle and have built integrations based on their open APIs or web services. So this is just a look at our company is completely cloud-based. This is our ecosystem. So sort of at the center, we see our cloud accounting application. We've got payroll in the cloud with Intuit. We use Bill.com. We use Tally as our expense reporting. Our Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, I put this in here because oftentimes when I talk about the next one, which email and calendars is Google Apps, people think we're using the cloud versions of those tools, but we're actually still using the on-premise installed tools. And then we use a product called Work, Etc. for workflow project management and CRM, and then our document management is Box. And the reason we chose this ecosystem was that these solutions work well together, and they've all approached the market with an open architecture attitude and the ability to pass data back and forth amongst the solutions. So ultimately, the question, becomes: is there too many choices? You might be saying, this looks great, but I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA, not an IT professional. How do I sift through all these apps and options, and I need some help? And you're not alone in that concern. With the firms we look or work with, the top 4 that we see them looking at in terms of cloud accounting, you've got AccountantsWorld, Xero, QuickBooks Online, and Intact. And then if you go on down, the list is very long with solutions like FreshBooks, Wave, Cashew, Outright, and there's many more. But that's just the first decision. Then you start to layer on top of that of how many add-ons are there for me to sift through. As I said, AccountantsWorld they started with Bill.com. They're being very selective in their strategy of who they work with on a third-party basis, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they built out their solution in more of the cloud suite model. But Intuit has approaching 75, Xero has over 400, and Intact has 120. So where does this leave people? A lot of it, and along the path to the cloud, it leaves them scratching their head and saying, I'm lost. And so the solution providers are recognizing that they're going to have to play a vital role in this as our consultants to the profession. So they've got to understand the profile of your firm, the types of clients, and coach firms on the short list of add-on options, or even go as far as to recommend. So that takes us to our final polling question.
All right, I will go ahead and open that up here. And attendees should see the poll question come up in just a second here. The question is, how many options do you want to choose from for your cloud ecosystem? As many as possible so I can choose the best. Give me a short list to choose from, or just tell me what I need. And so please select one of those 3 options and then click Submit. And just a reminder again, voting in all 3 of the poll questions is required if you'd like to earn CPE for attendance today. So we'll take just a few more seconds here, and then I'll close it out. Okay, the poll is now closed. And so Jim, it looks like give me a short list to choose from. Almost 50% of respondents selected that, and then a fairly even split between the other 2 options there.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So again, I think we're seeing that there needs to be some guidance in this space of what, either tell me what to do or at least narrow it down from the options, and that's consistent with what we're hearing from firms. Another resource in terms of navigating this path that I'll say is joining some kind of peer community. Up on the screen I have our producer circle, and I said I'd mention it, but this is a community of firms from across the country that are focused on cloud accounting and client advisory services that come together multiple times a year and really share their experiences and best practices. So it provides new perspectives, expertise, and confidence as you try to build this out and make your way down the path. So whether it's the producer circle or it's another peer group, I encourage you to reach out beyond the knowledge within your own firm, and it will fast track your progress. If you have interest in learning more about Producer Circle, we have information on our website. We've also got a letter that you can download that is, the URL is at the bottom of this slide. I don't know if it's in your printout, but it's boomer.com PC letter, or you can just go to our communities and Producer Circle, and it'll give you a snapshot of the sort of discussions and topics that are taking place there. So just closing comment, next time you find yourself evaluating cloud solution, ask yourself if the service is part of a larger ecosystem. You have to evaluate the whole group of solutions rather than analyzing any single one in isolation. And don't rule anything out just because it's missing a key feature. That feature might be covered by another third-party tool that's tightly integrated. So as cloud ecosystems continue to grow, so will our dependency on them in the software evaluation process. So that brings me to the end of my comments. I'm going to pass it back to Div for some closing comments, and then I think we still have some questions, but we'll probably need to follow up with you offline.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Jim, for a great presentation today. Just wanted to close with a couple of comments. First of all, everyone who's attended